It was the Apostle Paul who wrote in Romans 15, everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. And to the Corinthians he wrote, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us. Today we continue looking at wisdom and warnings out of the pages of the Old Testament. This is part 2, I'm calling it, but we really started a few weeks even before that. In the book of Exodus, looking at some of Israel's experiences and how they relate to us, what lessons they have to teach us, or how they serve as examples for things that were yet to come, fulfilled in Christ. Well, today we're all the way up. Can you believe it? We were at Exodus. We kind of ignored Leviticus, spent a little time in Numbers and Deuteronomy, and now we're in the book of Joshua. Any of you who are trying to read your Bible through in the year wish that they would go that quickly through Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, right? Joshua, fun book, exciting book. And we're going to take a few moments this morning in 2 different sections to look at some wisdom and warnings, some lessons for us surrounding the entry into the land. The time has come to enter the land that God has promised. So we're going to look at 5 different parts of this story in the early chapters of Joshua, really the first 5 chapters. I was going to do 7. I thought maybe I need to scale back a little bit and save 6 and 7 for next week. But it starts with Joshua. We learned last week as we looked at Moses' final instructions before God took him, and before Joshua then was replacing Moses as the leader of God's people. So here we are in Joshua, and Joshua is the first person really addressed in this book. We've just read it together. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Israel's been in the desert for 40 years. But now God announces to Joshua that the time has come to enter the land. About 39 years earlier, Joshua had been one of only 2 voices urging the nation to trust God and walk through the door he had opened. Joshua and Caleb said, yes, the people are big, but it's a good land, and our God can deliver it to us. But the people said no. They listened to the majority report. They chose fear instead of faith. So God waited for a new generation to come of age. Then God says to Joshua, now's the time. Be strong and courageous. Step up and step into what I have called you to do. So we read in verse 10, so Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp, tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. Now's the time. Are there any lessons here for us? I would suggest that as a church, we have discerned together that we are kind of in one of those now is the time moments. As a church, we've prayed, we've listened, we've discerned, we've planned, and now is the time. And as a church, we are together stepping up and stepping into this calling and saying, let's start to do what God is asking us to do. That's certainly a lesson for us collectively. Be strong, be courageous. God is with us. Now's the time. It's time to act, time to do. Are there lessons for us as individuals? I'm not going to suggest that God is saying to each one of you that there's something that now is the time for, but it's possible. In fact, it's even probable that God kind of laid this on my heart for this particular Sunday because somebody here has been struggling with something, and God is calling you to something, calling you to do something, and whatever that struggle, that maybe he wants to say to you that now is the time to take action. Now is the time to take a step. I don't know that. But if not today, the day may come. The day will likely come. If you are listening to God, if you are seeking God's direction in your life, the day will likely come when God says to you, like he said to Joshua, now is the time. Now is the time to act upon what I've been calling you to do. And when God does that, when that day comes, I pray that you, like Joshua, will be strong and courageous, that you, like Joshua, will step up and step into what God calls you to do. The story continues. This is part of it that we're not real familiar with. Verse 12 in Joshua 1. Joshua has just given instruction for all the people. The next verse says, but to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said. So here's some specific instructions for, get this, 2.5 of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's what it says. The tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Now there's a long story behind this. I'm not going to go into the whole story other than, you know where they are right now. They're on the east side of the Jordan River. And this, I always struggle with that because for some reason I want to think the Mediterranean and the East and all of this. No, I'll do this in the mirror. I mean, so it's right for you. So here's the Jordan River, okay? And in your map, east is this way, right? It's to the right. So the people of Israel are over here. Over here is the land that we now know, shouldn't cover the microphone, that we now know is the land of Palestine, the land of Israel, and over here is the Mediterranean Sea. During their wanderings in the desert, over on the east side and south of that, they encountered, just east of where they're going to enter, they encountered some enemies, and God gave them victory militarily, and 2.5 of the tribes thought, we really like this land. And they asked, and God blessed their desire to settle there. And God kind of gave them that inheritance as their inheritance. The tribe of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half of the tribe of Manasseh said, we like this land, and God said, I will give it to you as your inheritance. However, there was a condition. He said, however, when the time comes to go into the land, you are to fight with your brothers. And then when the battle's over, you can come back to your wives and families in this land on east side of the Jordan. So that's what's going on here. So to those groups, to the Reubenites, Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Like that little reminder, because some people struggle with the east and west. So remember, east is toward the sunrise. No, I'm doing that opposite for you. It's over there. So, you understand the story. You say, well, that's interesting. Why are you sharing that? Well, here's their response. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was also with Moses. They said, yes, we'll do what we agreed to do. We'll do what Moses commanded. We'll do what you ask us to do, even though it's not directly benefiting us. Our land is already taken. So what's the lesson there? Sometimes God may call us to do things that aren't directly benefiting us. What a novel thought. Might call us to work, to even lay our lives down, to risk our lives for something that ultimately is not necessarily serving us, but is serving our brothers and sisters in some way. So there is a lesson there for us, their willingness to join in the battle so that others may have what they already have. There can be a lesson there for us collectively, a lesson there for us as individuals, following the example of these 2.5 tribes that maybe we've never heard this story before. It's a good example for us to follow. Be willing to work for the benefit of others, not only for the benefit of ourselves. So the story continues. We're already to the third part. Then we'll take a break. We're in chapter 2, I believe. And it starts, Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies. Maybe he thought 12 was too many that last time. He secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at the Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. Jericho is the first city they're going to come to, by the way. Some of you knew that. So the 2 men set out, came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and stayed the night there. We're not told any details. We're trusting here. The point of the story as it continues is, for whatever reason, God led them there for their safety and their protection. And Rahab was willing to give that to them because somebody saw them and told the king, and the king sent someone to Rahab's house saying, we know that 2 men who are spies came here, bring them out so that we can deal with them. And she had hidden them upstairs under some flax sheaths or something, and she said, oh, you're right, they did come, but they went that way. So she lied, protecting them. Said they were here, but they've already left. They hurry and you might catch them. And that's what happened. And then the story continues. She then later, the evening, goes up and talks to the 2 spies hiding on the roof. Verse 8 says, before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up on the roof to talk with them. And here's what she said. I know the Lord has given you this land. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land, in our land, in our city, everyone in the land is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. She continues, now she's not making a declaration of what she's come to realize, but she's making a plea. She says, now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live along with my father and my mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families." And the men agreed. "We offer our own lives as a guarantee for your safety. If you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land." Verse 15, "Then since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, the city wall, she let them down by a rope through the window on the outside of the wall. 'Escape to the hill country,' she told them. 'Hide there for 3 days from the men searching for you. Then when they have returned, you can go on your way.' The spies went up into the hill country, stayed there 3 days. The men who were chasing them searched everywhere along the road. They finally returned without success. Then the 2 spies came down from the hill country, crossed the Jordan River, and reported to Joshua all that had happened to them. 'The Lord has given us the whole land,' they said, 'for all the people in the land are terrified of us.'" So that's the story. Now, what did this venture accomplish? It doesn't even say exactly what Joshua was hoping for when he sent the spies. It didn't seem to be like it had been 39 years earlier when the 12 were sent out. I don't think it was a question of go search out to see if we feel like we can go across the river and enter the land. Just interested in perhaps what has changed in 39 years, just wants to be informed, I guess. See if there's anything helpful, any helpful information you can bring back. And I'm guessing, but the helpful information they brought back, what seems to be the point of this, was to encourage Joshua to say, boy, they're terrified. They know we're coming, and they're scared to death. Put yourself in Joshua's sandals, whatever he's wearing. I imagine that would have been encouraging news. There's a little more to the story than that. Actually, there's a whole lot more to the story than that. Matthew chapter 1, in one of those really long lists of names. Actually, it's not that long, not nearly as long as some of the ones in the Old Testament. But it's a list that talks about what? Genealogy, yes, a list of names. Whose genealogy? The genealogy of Jesus. In this case, it starts with Abraham and moves forward. And we come down in verse 5 to a name, I would pronounce it Salmon. I don't know if it was called Salmon, S-A-L-M-O-N. I'll say it so we understand it's a name. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Did you know that, or were you looking? No, that's all right. The father of Boaz, now that Boaz, that name's familiar too. Boaz's mother, it says, was Rahab. But of course, it doesn't end there. You want to know what comes next? Boaz, the son of Salmon and Rahab, Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David, who became king. Who knows what may come from God and God's plan from us doing what God asked us to do? Who knows where some little detail of our story becomes part of a bigger story in ways that we could never imagine. Chapter 3 says, early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites left the acacia grove and arrived at the banks of the Jordan River, where they camped before crossing. This too might be part of the story that maybe you knew once and forgot. Maybe some of you are hearing it for the first time. Then Joshua told the people, "Purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you." In the morning, Joshua said to the priests, "Lift up the ark of the covenant, lead the people across the river." And so they started out and went ahead of the people. The Lord told Joshua, "Today I will make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you just as I was with Moses." I'm going to skip down to verse 14, so I'm not just telling you what God told Joshua and what he told the people and then what actually happened. Verse 14, "So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now it was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks." Just a minor little detail there, in case you wonder, because there are places where the Jordan River is fairly narrow, and in the dry season, not a real big deal to cross. As soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away, and the water below that point flowed on to the Dead Sea until the river bed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. Not just the Red Sea. It happened a second time. Maybe not quite as big a deal as what the sea was at that moment. Certainly no Egyptian army chasing them and this big sea impassable except for God's intervention. Probably they could have still waded through. I don't know. But let's continue reading. "Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord's covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by. They waited until the whole nation of Israel had crossed the Jordan on dry ground." And then we're not done. There's more to this than just getting across to the other side. "Meanwhile, God instructed Joshua to instruct the people. He asked for 12 men, one from each tribe, to come to the middle of the riverbed where the priests were standing with the ark, to pick up a stone. I don't think they meant a little one. To pick up a rock and to carry it over to the other side. Actually, from your perspective, over to the west side, the west bank as it's called, into the land, to carry those rocks. 12 men, 12 rocks, and where they camped that next night to set them up as a monument. And that's exactly what they did. And then Joshua said to the Israelites, I'm down in verse 21 if you're following your Bibles, "In the future your children will ask, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you can tell them, 'This is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes and kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up, until we had all crossed over. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever." The lesson for Israel: God is still with us. As he was back then, he's still with us now. Lesson for Israel: the Lord's hand is powerful. Lesson for Israel: never forget. If you got to write it down, pile up a bunch of rocks that were in the middle of the riverbed and now they're over here. And when you pass by this way, when your children ask, for generations to come, let it be a reminder that God is with us. The Lord's hand is powerful, so that all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, so that you might fear the Lord your God forever. God is with us. His hand is powerful. Never forget. Fast forward to chapter 6. The last part we'll consider today. Jericho is within sight. And we read, "Now the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people were afraid of the Israelites. No one was allowed to go out or in. But the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and all its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of you with the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. On the 7th day you are to march around the town 7 times with priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priests give one long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people shout as loud as they can." That's pretty good military strategy, isn't it? I don't know about you, I'd be scratching my head pretty hard. What? Oh, God wasn't finished. Then, he said, the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into town. Well, that helps. I'm glad you cleared that up and told me what's going to happen after we go out and walk around the city. And then the next day get up and walk around the city. And the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And on the 7th day we get up and we do 7 laps. And we blow some horns and we yell real loud. I'm sure that's going to work. And the walls are going to fall down. And that's exactly what happened. That's what they did. On the 7th day, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before, but this time they went around the town 7 times. The 7th time around, as the priests sounded the long blast on their horns, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the town." When the people heard the sound of the ram's horns, they shouted as loud as they could. Suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed. The Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. And you all heard it played just moments ago. Most of you caught that. It was fun watching your faces as you started to recognize that little children's tune, Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. And the walls came tumbling down. I think a lesson there is trust and obey even when it may not make sense to you. God was faithful to his word, and people were faithful in obeying, even to the detail, even things they could not understand. How could doing this possibly lead to where you say it's going to lead to? And there may be reasons for this. I'm not an architect. There may be reasons that God used. I mean, there were a lot of people. And I know, you get just a few people. You can be down in the basement, and there can just be a few people walking up here, and you can hear it. I mean, it feels like it's shaking the floor a little bit. And I don't know. Even if there was some natural part of all of this that was loosening the foundations, it's a God thing. It's God saying, here's how I want it done this time. And trust me for the results. And sometimes the way God leads us may seem very counterintuitive. Certainly we read that in the Gospels, the things that Christ calls us to do, the way he calls us to lay down our own lives, to serve others, the way he tells us that the way up is down, that the way to greatness is to be a servant. All of these things, they may not make any sense from a human perspective. God says through Paul in Corinthians that even the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of man. The things we might say is foolish, and to God it's just a tiny thing, well beyond our comprehension. Trust and obey, even when it doesn't make sense to us. As God said to another leader of Israel many generations later, just stand and watch and see the salvation of God. Sometimes he calls us to stand back and watch. Sometimes he calls us to take action and do something that may seem very strange. There is one more part to that part of the story, just in case you wondered whether I was stretching things about that Rahab bit. I mean, really, I'm not the only person in the world named Mark. Maybe it's not the same person. Verse 22, meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, keep your promise, go to the prostitute's house and bring her out along with all her family. Okay. The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all the other relatives who were with her. They moved her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. Okay. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were with her in the house, because she had hidden the spies Joshua sent to Jericho. And at the time of this writing, the next sentence is, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. And she eventually married a man named Salmon. And they had a son. His name was Boaz. He ended up marrying a woman named Ruth. And they had a great-grandson, or great-grandson, I think. His name was David. Who knows how God might use us as we step up to what he calls us to do, as we step into that, as we take the action when he says now is the time, as we trust him and follow him. Who knows?